Hi everyone, welcome to part 2. Okay, Shirov has just played rook b8, and Nakamura continued with rook e2, so gaining a tempo on the queen and threatening queen takes d6 with a winning attack. So queen b6 is correct for black in order to defend d6. And now comes bishop d5, moving into the weakness that black created in the opening, this d5 square, and it wasn't too much of a problem then, but now it's quite serious. This bishop at d5 is very well placed, and it's hard for Shirov to counter it immediately. What he played was rook g7, unpinning the f pawn against the pressure from the bishop on the rook, and this allows f5 and also the doubling of rooks on the g file once this bishop is taken care of with good pressure. Playing instead bishop h5, trying to win the exchange, achieves little after queen a4 check, king f8, rook f1, and in actual fact white now has a good edge. If bishop takes e2, then rook takes f7 as mate. So rook g7 anyway. And now came queen d2 from Nakamura, giving added protection to b2 and preparing to get the a1 rook into the game by swinging it over to the king's side. And Shirov continued aggressively with f5, and his pawn center is now very strong. And watching this game live, I was convinced that he had better chances in the long run as a result of it, but Nakamura proved me wrong. After rook f1 is how he continued, and king d7 is a logical move from Shirov, getting the king out of the firing line of the rook here at e2 and avoiding any potential tactics, whilst making way to double rooks and increase the pressure on the king's side. Also, it gives the weak d6 pawn here another defender, and given Shirov's central control with his pawns, Nakamura must seek counterplay where his pawns are strong on the queen side here, and that's where he started now with b4. So now came f4 from Shirov, gaining space and giving the bishop at g6 more mobility. Like according to Capablanca, you should always strive to have your pawns on opposite colored squares to that of your bishop, and mobility is the reason why, the one exception being in endings of opposite colored bishops. But anyway, a4 from Nakamura, continuing this queenside expansion. And Shirov answered with a5, stopping white from playing a5 himself, gaining tempo on the queen here. But now he has b5, gaining more space. And now came rook d8 from Shirov, which is both a curious and slightly passive move. Presumably his idea is to overprotect d6 and bring his king over to the queen side, where it should be safer than where it is now in the center. And it's as good a plan as any other. He can't double rooks on the g file just yet, thanks to the bishop here at d5, and it's important to note too that he can't challenge that, say for example with bishop f7 instead of rook d8, because after bishop takes f7, rook takes f7 as rook takes e5, exploiting the pin on the d pawn, and in this position white would have big advantage. So it makes sense to move the king first before trying to challenge this bishop, if Shirov is going to at all. But doing this gives Nakamura a chance to take the initiative, which he does expertly. And Shirov was also starting to get into time trouble at this point, which proved to be a big problem later on. So rook d8 anyway is what Shirov has just played. And now came g3, which is a move I was personally very impressed with watching the game, because it weakens the king's safety. But for now that isn't important, as white has the h1 a8 diagonal firmly under control, and what's more significant is that it generates great initiative, as f takes g3 is essentially forced, so the position is opening up when all the trumps are Nakamura's, notably the f file and the vulnerable black king in the center, which is much more exposed than the white king here on h1, and despite the lack of pawns to shelter it after h takes g3. And Naka's plan of removing castling rights from Shirov is proving to be very effective now, and he makes this g3 push at exactly the right time to undermine black's center and exploit his slight lack of coordination as much as possible. So all very nice play. So king c8 from Shirov, trying to get his king to safety, but the tempi it's costing to do this is proving expensive. And now white has a choice of good plans, among them doubling rooks on the f-file or playing rook f6 immediately. And Nakamura went for c4 instead, keeping everything solid and setting up some tactics for a few moves' time. So king b8 is how Shirov continued, still concerned with king's safety. And note here also white's control of f7 after this f-file is opened up, which is a very important factor as it stops black from challenging this dominant bishop at d5 with bishop f7. It's the control this bishop has over all of the play. It's attacking and defending. It's a brilliantly posted piece, and it's white's control of f7 that is stopping black from challenging it. So it's a brilliant conception from Nakamura, all things considered. And he continued now with the rook f6 with a strong invasion to the 6th rank with his rooks, applying pressure to d6 and threatening to double up rooks on the f-file, which gives white a big edge now, bordering on a pawn, objectively speaking, overall in the position, which is, getting close to a winning advantage. So, rook e7 now from Shirov. And as I said, he's running out of plans here. He's getting quite passive. His idea here is to play e4, but it's not too hot of an idea, as you'll see. Nakamura continued with king h2, a very calm move that keeps everything solid and makes sure that the king isn't in the firing line if the bishop at d5 ever moves. And, there's no need to rush things, as white has a very good grip on the position, and Nakamura was playing quickly here too to emphasize Shirov's time trouble, which was now getting quite bad. He had about 3 minutes to make 6 moves, whereas Nakamura had about 20 minutes, if I remember correctly. And black starting to look pretty passive here, and Shirov blundered looking for activity with e4, as this gives white a very strong continuation. Better for black was queen c7, although it's not much better. As I said, he's starting to look passive, and due to Nakamura's stronger grip on the position as a whole, he'll be able to gradually strengthen his pieces and then go in for the kill when it suits him. It's kind of luxury you have when you have a superior position. So e4 is kind of desperation from Shirov, really, a mixture of desperation and time trouble. And queen c3 is how Nakamura played, and this is a strong continuation with a good plan in mind. However, he missed a much stronger continuation, and if you want to try and spot it from this position, then stop the video now. c5 was the move, and now white has a big advantage over a pawn and a half. There's no d takes c5 because of rook takes b6, and if queen takes c5, then white has queen takes a5 with a winning attack. Let's have a look at that. If queen takes c5 here, now queen takes a5, threatening queen takes d8, and white has a positional advantage and an attack with the strength that gives him an overall evaluation in this position of +7, so it means that this attack will decide the game. Most advisable for black is rook h8. Now comes queen a8 check, forcing king c7, and white can win the rook at h8, but also good is queen b7 check, forcing king d8, and now queen b8 check, forcing to avoid mate queen c8, and now rook takes d6 check, rook d7, queen b6 check, king e7, rook e6 check, king f8, and now queen d4, threatening queen takes h8, and black has no way to avoid getting mated here. With correct play from white, it will take a maximum of 7 moves, according to Fritz. So, queen takes c5 is no good in this position. After c5, better would be queen c7, but now Nakamura would have c takes d6, which is the strongest move, although playing c6 and pawn storming is also strong. Best play here goes rook takes d6, and now the pawn sacrifice b6 gives white a winning attack. After rook takes b6 check, queen takes b6, and queen c3, with the dual threat of rook b2 winning the queen, and queen h8 check with a winning attack for white gives Nakamura an advantage of nearly 4 pawns in this position. But unfortunately, as I said, Nakamura missed this continuation with c5, much to the surprise of everyone watching on Chess Bomb, and played instead queen c3. Okay, that's the end of part 2.